When I was growing up, there were kids who could tell the aircraft by the sound of the aircraft.
Yeah, if you're around them.
We do have a podcast to do, guys.
My kids are that way with donuts.
Yes.
4, 3, 2.
The Apple Company presents a truly terrible podcast. Welcome to Nonsense, episode number 6. I'm Jeff Parker.
And I'm CJ Little.
This is our take on the week's business, tech, and entertainment headlines. This time, we'll give a primer on how AI works. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, it's our favorite subject. Look at how advanced computer chips are made. Discuss the early life of someone named Morris Chang. Examine the extreme importance of a little island in the Pacific Ocean. And explain why ASML is the linchpin and who controls the future of AI. Oh my goodness, these guys can't stop talking about AI.
You can't spell nonsense without AI.
But first, our headlines. Energy generated from solar and wind power reportedly overtook natural gas in the European Union for the first time last year.
This is great. This is a good thing.
Solar and wind energy rose to an all-time high of 22% of the EU's 2022 electricity use.
That's a relative number. 22% of their energy use is just because the gas number went down?
Now, what happened was that Vladimir Putin invaded Ukraine and cut off natural gas exports to the EU.
Yeah, I don't think that's working out the way he thought it was going to.
Well, but he's going to end up being the guy who brings us all to a greener future.
Yeah. Like
inadvertently, he's not meaning to do this.
Greenpeace singing him an award. Earth Day, we're all going to sing about Vladimir Putin.
Yes.
Yeah, great.
We're all putting up pictures of Vladimir Putin to celebrate Earth Day.
We absolutely should.
Antarctica's only EV had to be redesigned because of climate change.
Antarctica has an EV, and Tesla still can't get their Cybertruck out the door.
It's got shot put holes in the windows.
Yeah, that's true. Those aren't going to buff out.
The EV in Antarctica overheating is now a concern because of climate change.
You would think overheating wouldn't be high on your list of things that happen in Antarctica.
It's designed for operating temperatures and winter temperatures of negative 50 degrees Celsius. The negative is important there.
It's like 220 degrees Kelvin.
The southern... okay. The southern polar region is now a comparatively balmy negative 10 degrees Celsius. Wow. What in the world is going on at the Dallas Zoo?
That's a good question. I don't know.
Nova, a 25-pound clouded leopard, escaped from a suspicious opening in her fence. Then a breach was found in the Langer monkey enclosure. Then Pin, a 35-year-old endangered lappet-faced vulture, was found fatally and intentionally wounded in his enclosure. This happened over like a 2-week period. And then finally, 2 emperor tamarin monkeys were stolen and later recovered inside of a vacant home in a nearby city, despite heightened security measures.
I get people stealing monkeys. I don't like it.
You do?
I do. I don't like it.
Really? If you want to have a monkey, just have a baby.
Yeah, but that's true in so many ways, in so many various ways. But who goes and kills a vulture? What did the vulture do to you? I don't get it.
Well, they arrested 24-year-old Davian Irvin on charges of burglary and cruelty to animals. He's linked to the Langer monkey. He's linked to the tamarin monkeys, the clouded leopard, but not accused in the death of the vulture.
Did they get all the monkeys back?
Yeah.
Okay. Where'd they find this guy?
They found him at the Dallas World Aquarium.
Just fishing?
Just doing a little fishing. He came to the aquarium with some nets. He was just going to harvest some krill.
I don't think.
He was questioning an employee about ways to catch animals.
What a way to tip your hand.
I'm no poker player. That seems like a tell.
It's a bit of a tell. Yeah. Yeah.
I'm going to take it one more step and just say I'm not really wildly crazy about zoos.
I'm not crazy about zoos either.
We got rid of the circuses and all of the little...
Yeah, those were worse, though.
Those were worse, but you know what? Animals in cages generally, especially like elephants, which require millions of miles of land to be psychologically stimulated. They really have to travel, and you keep them in a little enclosure that you think is...
square feet. I mean, I like kids being able to see all the different kinds of animals.
Yeah, we have YouTube now. We can go out in the wild and we can shoot lovely video of these things in their natural habitat. Yeah. No one has talked about this next story. This is just one you and I have to ourselves.
Yeah, just this,
The balloon, the Chinese balloon that's flying in high-altitude surveillance balloon over sensitive sites. It's first seen above Montana, and a second balloon is spotted over Latin America.
I have a real hard time believing that the Chinese are a super sophisticated intelligence-gathering country and that they're getting this intelligence with balloons that the local yokels can see flying overhead.
You would hope their spying capabilities would be a little stealthier than that.
It's hard to hide the blimp. Now, you would have thought they would have brought out like the Wright brothers plane from the Smithsonian to shoot this thing down. But no. They went ahead and got a couple F-22s.
It's a balloon for crying out loud.
Yeah, it's a fucking balloon. Like the intern that got that job, he was just like, oh, fuck, I'll go shoot down the balloon. By
the way, they had to warn people to not shoot at it.
Yeah, sure.
Because people apparently were thinking their bullets were going to go up 60,000 feet.
Sure, yeah, and hit it and bring it down. The call signs for those F-22s were called Frank 1 and Frank 2, which was pretty cool because the names signaled the goal of the mission before it even took off. So it wasn't a very stealthy operation. They were named for Second Lieutenant Frank Luke Jr., who was a hero from World War I. And he was known for, wait for it, destroying German observation balloons,
Sure.
which is pretty awesome. And he was credited with shooting down more than a dozen balloons before he was killed in World War I and awarded the Medal of Honor. Interesting, when I read this, I was like, that's an interesting name, Frank Luke. He's from Arizona. Luke Air Force Base, which is where the F-35s are trained now in Western Phoenix, is named after him.
You can't really steer one of these balloons like this. You can go up and down. Have you been to the balloon festival in Albuquerque?
New Mexico? No, I have not.
Yeah, that's kind of interesting because the balloons all take off and they're all going one direction when they take off.
And they'll try to come back and land in the same place.
They do. They come back and land at the same place because if you go up in altitude, the wind is blowing the other direction.
That's what's interesting, though. From the reading I had done last week around these airships, you can do a pretty decent job steering these things by just changing your attitude, right?
Well,
Changing
you don't
your
have a
elevation.
lot of control.
I'm not suggesting maybe this should be Southwest new travel. You go get in the balloon.
Couldn't be any worse.
You're like, you're either going to Nashville or you're going to Tampa. We don't know.
Maybe if you have relatives in both, you'll be covered.
It'll be great.
You're going to have a great Christmas. This will be fine.
You're going to have a lovely time. And then you land in Nova Scotia, and they're like, we're sorry. They have really good pickled fish. You'll love it.
You're going to enjoy this.
And I do recommend to our listeners, if you go look at the picture of Frank Luke Jr., he's like the most handsome pilot I've ever seen. So anyway, that was the fun part of the story to me.
It's a balloon. I mean, this is the crazy thing. We were scrambling its transmissions from when we first spotted it over Montana. So there was no rush to shoot it down. The reason we shot it down over water is so that we could retrieve all the parts. You don't want them breaking apart, on land, and then you can't reassemble and figure out what it was actually doing.
Like a pinata of Chinese chips. Just
exactly.
Did you hear about Jupiter?
Yeah, I did.
It's a big planet. Still a planet.
Giant ball of gas, much like me.
Giant ball of gas, that's actually how I have you in my phone. When you call me, it says giant ball of gas. Here, this is pretty cool.
One giant red eye.
They have discovered 12 more previously unknown moons around Jupiter.
Fantastic.
You want to guess what it brings the total count to?
No.
I was thinking like 30. I was like, 30 is a lot of moons.
That'd be a good number.
That'd be a good number of moons. 92.
I feel so gypped here on Earth.
Why?
We just have the one.
The one moon that we know of.
I feel like we're not even in the game.
Yeah, Saturn was the previous leaderboard winner with 83. That's a lot of moons.
That's a lot of moons. Well, congrats to Jupiter. I didn't get it anything.
Yeah, I did. But here's what's even more crazy.
Yeah.
They believe there are more moons, smaller moons that we can't even really detect or see.
Because it's a giant ball of glare.
It's just a big, it's like staring into the sun.
Right, the way it reflects light is crazy.
Yep.
China's access to semiconductors could take yet another hit soon. Japan and the Netherlands will soon join the U.S. in restricting exports of semiconductor manufacturing equipment to China. That's in response to President Joe Biden visiting the Netherlands, where he asked Dutch government officials to restrict export from a company called ASML, the largest company in the Netherlands. ASML's machines could literally decide who controls the future of AI.
So this story I don't entirely buy, because I just presumed that like 2/3 of our semiconductors already came from China.
Right. You would think.
And then I was like, all right, well, I get it. Japan likely provides some level of expertise, and we're going to restrict that going into China. But what the fuck does the Dutch have to do with it?
The company Nikon from Japan is who's
the
providing.
optics.
Yeah.
But I don't understand what are the Dutch? What are
tulips?
They? Oh, tulips.
Tulip juice.
That's
your iPhone runs on tulip juice.
I had no idea.
Know that. Now you do.
I had no idea. That would explain why when the tulip juice leaks out, it no longer works. This story just sounds like gibberish to me.
Yeah. This little story not only explains why Nancy Pelosi's visit to Taiwan in 2022 has its own Wikipedia entry, but also how a deeply divided Congress came together to pass the $280 billion Chips and Science Act.
That was an opportunity lost, right? They should have called that the Chips and Guacamole Act.
Oh, I like that.
Right?
This story involves the next generation of smart bombs, drones, and military jets, and also the braking system of your Toyota.
Have they fixed that yet?
To fully understand this story, we're going to need more than a headline. In fact, it will take the remainder of this episode. Buckle up.
That's right, folks. The entire episode about AI. A brief explainer on how it works.
Hit that button.
Hit it down. This is going to be How AI Works for Dummies by dummies.
How does AI work? Can you give me some sort of primer on how AI works?
That's a good question. Nobody knows.
Now you can give us as much as people know.
So it works by using a combination of algorithms, mathematical models, and statistical methods to enable machines to effectively perform tasks that typically require human intelligence, right? Such as pattern recognition or decision making or something like understanding natural language.
Right.
And there's a whole bunch of different approaches to implementing AI. The ones you'll hear a lot about commonly are machine learning. So this would involve training a machine to learn from data without being explicitly programmed. And that's really the key difference, is instead of you doing something that's like procedurally and explicitly programmed, if you see this, do this.
Yeah.
None of that is evident in machine learning, right? So you're using algorithms that can identify patterns in the data, such as recognizing an object and an image or identifying speech, and then have some output, right? Make some decision.
Right. This is going to come up in a minute, so let me just say,
Yeah.
we're going to talk about ML. We mean machine learning.
You also hear about deep learning. So this is sort of a type of machine learning that uses artificial neural networks to model complex relationships between the inputs and the outputs. So this is very much inspired by the structure and function of our brains.
Yes.
And that allows AI systems to learn and make decisions based on large amounts of data. And these neural networks are super interesting to me too, because they don't make any sense, right? Like to a human and as an observer, you look at it and you basically see a bunch of nodes with weights, and you'll have some input nodes.
Explain what a node is.
You basically just have a bunch of numbers moving through a network of matrix math, and these individual nodes hold values, weighted values of
Right.
And you're talking about not like 5 or 10. You're talking about on the order of tens or hundreds of thousands of nodes between the left side, the input side, and the output side. In one of these systems, you have to train the machine with training data. So you start with this network of these nodes, these abstract concepts of values, and they don't know anything. They don't do anything.
Until you put data through it.
So you put data through it. So you basically teach it. So you say, let's say we want it to identify red octagons, right? We're going to say, this is a stop sign. I want you to identify red octagons. You feed it a bunch of pictures that have red octagons.
Right.
You don't draw the octagon.
That would be very
tell
useful
it.
for autonomous driving.
So you feed all this stuff into it, and then you just tell it, that one's a stop sign, that one's a yield sign, right? You don't tell
or
it.
just this is not a stop. This is a stop sign. This is not a stop sign.
Yeah, I mean, the classic example from Mike Judge is hot dog, not a hot dog, which was the funniest fucking thing. Did you watch all of Silicon Valley?
No.
Oh my God. There's a scene where Jin Yang makes a hot dog detector, right? And it can detect hot dogs. And the whole team freaks out because it detects hot dogs perfectly, right? And it'll be like, oh, that's a hot dog. Great. And then they just made this assumption that it could detect other things like, tacos or burritos.
But no.
Nope. It's just hot dog or not a hot dog.
Hot dog, not hot dog.
Which is fantastic.
Sure. But that's actually a big part of AI. I mean, literally.
That's the joke. That's basically how it works.
Yeah.
So you feed all this data through it, and what you're doing is you're setting up all these values in these nodes so that when something that comes in looking like a stop sign or a red octagon, it will come out the other end as stop sign.
Right.
Right? Now, there's really no way for us as humans to look at it and know what it's going to do.
What it's going to output.
What it's going to output. Yeah. And you can't really tell why it's made the decisions that it's made. Right? Like, the math behind it.
Sure.
But you can't look at a set. Like, I could not show you the neural network of this and say, what do you think this thing's going to do? You would have no idea.
Right.
Because it's just a bunch of math.
Right.
It's
But we
pretty
can
nuts.
change weightings and things like that so that we get the output that we're hoping to get.
Yeah, absolutely. You can tune it for sure. If I code something procedurally and make a mistake, you could argue I have some liability because I did it poorly. But with a neural network, you're just like,
Test.
Yeah, exactly. And don't worry, they're still not deterministic, so you still don't know that it's actually going to do the right thing.
Of course.
Every 12,265th time, it may just run over the school bus full of kids.
100%.
And you're just like, whoopsies. So that's sort of deep learning, using neural networks. You've got rule-based systems that are AI systems that follow sort of a set of rules to perform tasks. You'll typically see these used for something that's more simple, that require a clear or straightforward decision-making process. You have NLP, which stands for natural language processing. This is one of the earlier, I'd say, production uses of AI that I saw, which involved using AI to process and understand human language. So you're using this every single day when you engage Siri or Google or your Home Assistant or any of those. That's pretty impressive. Like, the fact that is table stakes now is kind of crazy, because 10 years ago, it was it was like the sci-fi,
right?
And now it's just table stakes. So anyway, Ultimately, AI works by using these various techniques and algorithms to enable machines to process and analyze a tremendously large amount of data.
What are we talking about in size? How much data? A megabyte? A megabyte?
Depends. Yeah,
2
anywhere,
megabytes?
yeah, 6 to 7 kilobytes is most. No,
Is that right?
Nobody gets these jokes. I mean, you're talking about typically on the order of gigabytes to terabytes of data for an average system. But forget about the number of bits. You need at least, sort of roundly speaking, 10 to hundreds of thousands of pieces of data to train them.
Yeah.
You can't do a good job, at least not that I know of, training any sort of neural network or any sort of AI on 10 pieces of data. You can't show it 10 stop signs and expect it to know. So a lot of problems can be hard to tackle with AI because you don't have a huge data set, or at least you may not have found a huge data set yet. But what's cool about this is you can get these systems.
It's why your autonomous car needs decades of learning before you actually put it into production.
Yeah, and it's also crazy to think about how you put in a situation that it doesn't know what to do, and yet a human does.
Yeah.
You know, like you're driving down, they just redid Balboa Boulevard in the Valley. There are no stripes on it.
Right.
So you're going down.
What do you do?
And I'm actually amazed that most people that drive down Balboa still kind of get it right.
Yeah.
Like, which is incredible with no striping. They still sort it, like they don't do a great job. They do an okay job.
It's like driving in Paris.
Yeah.
Just less smoking.
Ultimately, there's a couple things that I think are worth highlighting here. The difference between machine learning, ML, and AI, artificial intelligence, is frequently misunderstood. And to be honest, it still confuses me many times. Machine learning typically learns and predicts based on passive observations, whereas an artificial intelligence implies an agent interacting with the environment to learn and take actions that maximize its chance of successfully achieving its goals.
Right.
Yeah. As of 2020, many sources continue to assert that machine learning remains a subfield of AI, but others have the view that not all machine learning is part of AI, and only really an intelligent subset of machine learning should be considered AI.
I get why.
You get why?
Yeah.
Oh, well, please.
Because the magic of machine learning, as you get used to it, is just like, yeah, okay, I get it.
This is the old Arthur C. Clarke quote, right? Where any technology, any good technology should be indistinguishable from magic.
Right, right. And eventually that magic isn't magic anymore. We all go, yeah, Siri understands what I'm saying.
NLP is a great example. NLP, I think 15 years ago, you were dealing with like Dragon software that was kind of terrible.
Right.
Like we dealt with it, but it was kind of terrible.
I used it.
And it just wasn't great. And now you dictate stuff to Siri. My Siri's literally lit up right now. It thinks I'm talking to it.
Because you said it.
Right? It's that good. So it's pretty nuts.
Yeah.
I recently heard the difference between the two, AI and ML, summarized as, if you don't quite know how to do it yet, it's AI.
Yes.
If we already figured it out, it's machine learning. Right? I thought that was pretty good.
That's exactly right.
Yeah. So it's like it's just moving from one bucket to the other.
Right. Right.
Okay. Why is this relevant to what we're talking about here with chips and ASML and all these other things we had in the top of the show? You give up pretty quickly. So ChatGPT is an implementation on top of OpenAI 3.5.
Right.
And ultimately, it's using a plethora of artificial intelligence systems to enable.
But actually, an open source project from Google is the core of it.
Yeah, that's true.
GPT stands for
Generative Pre-trained Transformer.
Yeah, the transformer is the part that comes from Google.
Oh, well, yeah, okay, sure. The underlying concept. Yeah. You have probably heard a lot from us and also on the news about ChatGPT, which is an implementation.
What is that? First time I've heard about it.
Yeah, it's an app you put on your phone.
Okay.
That will tell you the weather.
Actually, in 4.0, it will be an app on your phone.
Yeah, it already is. There's already 1,000 people that have implementation on that. ChatGPT is an implementation of OpenAI, or sort of implemented on top of OpenAI. And to our knowledge, this runs on NVIDIA's latest GPU, which is now about 2 years old, released in 2020. Right. It's called the A100.
Mission critical for ChatGPT to be able to do what it does as cheaply as it's able to do it.
You need these GPUs, right? Yeah. Graphic processing units. Now, this is different than the chip that's inside your
game machine,
your classic PC. Well, even just like the CPU that's in your classic PC, and definitely different than the GPU that you're using for gaming, right? It's not even intended for gamers or even like high-end workstation.
But that's their expertise. That's where they came from.
That's where they came from.
Making GPUs for gamers.
Yep. But there's now these class of GPUs that are purpose-built for data centers, and that's what this A100 is.
Right.
And this thing's crazy, okay? So the A100, it's NVIDIA's first GPU to be built on TSMC's 7-nanometer process.
Right. Basically, let's explain that very quickly.
Yeah.
You get the size of the transistor, and you can shrink it down and shrink it down and shrink it down, and you want to have as many transistors on a silicon wafer chip as you can.
Yep.
7 nanometers is the measurement of the transistor, which is incredibly small. It's mind-blowing how small that is.
So a nanometer is a billionth of a meter. very, very tiny. You get to this scale, it just doesn't make a lot of sense, right? Like what is this? So this allows 54 billion transistors to fit on the A100's 826 square millimeter die. So for all you Freedom Unit folks, that's about 1.25 square inches, right? It's a chip that's just over 1 inch on each side. A die that's over 1 inch on each side.
Yeah.
65 million transistors per square millimeter.
Wow.
Right? Which is about 1.3 billion transistors on the surface of your average number 2 pencil eraser.
Yeah,
Right?
that's mind-blowing.
Mind-blowing.
And
right?
it's like double the number of transistors almost of the previous version.
Right? Yep.
Which
So
was 2 years earlier.
our good friend Moore's Law, right? It says
Yeah.
roughly speaking, every 18 months, you're going to see double the number of transistors for the same price, right?
You know, he's still alive.
He is still alive.
He's like 94 years old, and he now says Moore's Law is not happening just by itself. People are aspiring to make
Totally.
Moore's Law be
Totally.
true.
Yeah, of course. We got nothing else.
Yeah.
Okay.
And by the way, one more thing about Gordon Moore. He himself believed there would be an end to Moore's Law
Absolutely.
long ago.
Long ago.
And is blown away by the advancements in technology that have allowed us to continue to make transistors smaller.
Probably 3 or 4 times he's thought that.
Yeah.
I mean, it does seem like every 10-ish years we butt up against something where they're like, physics. You
becomes
just
a
can't
physics
do
problem.
it.
Exactly.
Yeah. And then it just falls off.
Right.
Some egghead figures it
Nope.
out and we just push right through
Here
it.
we go.
Yep. So this is an example of that. So this A100 in this 1-inch square chip with 55 billion transistors on
Yeah.
it, you've got 7,000 32-bit floating point cores.
Yes.
You've got 3,500 64-bit cores.
Yes.
And then 420 tensor cores. So the tensor cores are effectively like matrix math. Oh, by the way, each A100 has 40 gigabytes of memory that
Right.
moves at about 2 terabytes per second. Right?
Yeah.
That is mind-boggling. This
Blazing.
is on one GPU.
Yeah.
This chip consumes about 250 watts of power. Now, for perspective,
Okay.
that means that you could heat an 8-ounce cup of water from the tap up to boiling for your tea in about 6 minutes.
Sure.
That's how much
it runs
power.
hot.
Yeah, it runs
It
little warm.
contributes to global warming.
At least localized warming in the data center for sure. Okay, so what we're looking at here, ChatGPT's latest version, through 3.5 I mentioned earlier, has over 175 billion parameters
Right.
to get an output for a single query. And that means it needs at least 5-ish A100 GPUs
Yeah.
to load the model in text.
Right.
And it's capable of outputting around 15...
You aren't even starting before you have 5
Yep.
A100s.
Yep. And you need about 15 to 20 words per second, give or take. This is all sort of squishy math.
Mm-hmm.
And so you're sort of looking at a server with 8 A100 GPUs in order to make this work.
Right.
Now, conveniently, in 2020,
Yeah.
there was an A100 packaged up with 8 GPUs in what's called the DGX A100.
Yeah, because NVIDIA is not stupid. They knew how to put this
They knew
together.
how to use this, yeah. So it's got 2 64-core AMD CPUs,
Mm-hmm.
8 of these A100. They throw in a terabyte of memory just for good measure.
Sure.
A bunch of NVMe high-speed storage, and they're only $200,000.
Which
right?
you're making it light of. That's actually for that much processing power.
Insane. It's
Yes,
insane what
it's
you're getting for that.
incredible.
And by the way, that was 2020 dollars, right? So we're in 2023. So
Yeah.
I'm sure this thing has degraded in price a bit. And then, I just like to keep this in perspective. Those 8 A100s provide 320 gigabytes of VRAM to
Yeah.
consume. And we can all do the dance of my first computer had 8 megabytes of memory. My
2
first
floppy
hard drive.
drives,
Yeah,
sure.
exactly. So it's just nuts to see how much is shoved in this thing that we use to have it write me poems about how to break into your house, right? That's really
Right,
how
from
I end up using it.
ChatGPT,
From ChatGPT.
exactly.
So what does this all mean? Well, at the end, without really powerful chips, modern AI just
super
does
advanced
right?
chips.
Just doesn't exist.
Right.
None of this would work, but you need...
But you're right. By the way, your iPhone doesn't exist and your Mac doesn't exist either. When we come back, we'll look at how modern advanced chips are made, because I'm sure you were just asking, hey, AI geniuses, that's great. It requires big, fancy chips. How do you make the chips?
Anybody referring to us as AI geniuses needs to really reevaluate their life.
Hit the button.
Hit the button.
All right, so AI was a little more complicated than I thought it was going to be when I initially thought,
Big
let's have you
surprise.
explain
Yeah.
AI. The good news is I can explain how modern advanced computer chips are made very briefly.
Ooh, are you going to do the sour cream and onion flavor too?
Probably not. Optical lithography, that is light and masking, etches silicon wafers. That's how you get a chip. The end. Hit the button.
Oh, great. That was easy.
We're done.
Moving on.
I'll give you a little more detail, just a tiny bit more detail, so that you can understand what this is. Pretend you're drawing a circuit and maybe some transistors on a piece of paper. And you make that paper into a mask, that is to say, so that when you flash a bright light on it, the lines that you drew show up on the silicon wafer.
Yep.
You can burn that drawing of that circuit into a silicon wafer. Congratulations. Now you have an integrated circuit.
Excellent.
Now, make your drawing twice as big as the wafer and then reduce it so the circuit can do more with the same size wafer. That's more room to put transistors on the circuit, among other things, right?
Yep.
Makes perfect sense.
Miniaturization. I feel like we're in like 1960 right now is about where you are in this process.
Probably still in the 50s.
Probably still in the 50s.
If your photolithographic process is high enough resolution, you can make your circuit drawing several orders of a magnitude larger and then reduce that down to fit on something close to the same original silicon wafer size.
Yep.
So think of all the amazing things you can do with that much drawing space.
Yeah, of course.
Right?
More transistors.
While we're at it, why are we working in 2D when we could be working in 3D?
Of course.
We can repeat the photolithographic cycle a few times, and that's a lot more space for more circuit you can draw and tons more transistors, right? We just keep making things smaller and smaller and smaller on the final wafer. These days, a wafer may go through the photolithographic cycle as many as 50 times.
Wow, that's crazy.
Yeah. So think about this. The first commercially available microchip, the Texas Instruments TMS 0100, which was introduced in 1958, had only about a dozen transistors on it.
That's nuts. I also would love to point out that even Texas Instruments in the 50s called their first product version 100.
Isn't that great?
They didn't start out with 1. They're just like, nope, start with 100.
Kind of make us look like we know what we're doing.
Exactly.
Like we know what we're
no
doing.
one's going to use the first one.
Sure.
This is our 100th chip.
It's the 100th chip. It's just a round number by chance. Yeah.
Weird.
So by comparison to the dozen transistors on that chip, NVIDIA's that we were just talking about, the A100 chip, has 54 billion transistors.
So a couple more.
So they fit a few more onto the wafer. Basically the same
basic size,
size wafer, which is remarkable. NVIDIA designs that chips, but most of the chips the world uses, smartphone powering chips, are not designed by their manufacturers.
Yeah.
Over 90% of the world's smartphones run on chips that are called ARM-based. ARM is an acronym for Advanced RISC Machines. Well, that makes perfect sense, doesn't it? Because you know what RISC is.
Well, I love when they embed an acronym inside another acronym, first of all. That just always makes me smile. Like, this is too many letters. Let's just go ahead and shorten it down.
Advanced RISC Machines.
Yep.
RISC is an acronym.
Yep.
Standing for Reduced Instruction Set Chips.
Yep.
That is to say, reduced from previous chip designs, which they called CISC.
I love that the C in CISC stands for complex.
Complex instruction set chips. So because there are fewer instructions in a RISC chip, each instruction can run faster and, more importantly, on less power.
Yep.
ARM Holdings, who makes the ARM designs, is headquartered in Cambridge, England. It's owned by SoftBank, a Japanese conglomerate. Companies that rely on ARM chips designs include Apple, Samsung, Qualcomm, NVIDIA, and lots of others.
I've heard of a couple of those companies.
Those companies like to make it sound like they design their own chips.
Yeah.
They do not. They merely modify and extend the designs that they license from ARM. Now, ARM doesn't actually make chips. ARM does no fabrication. Apple, Qualcomm, and NVIDIA don't either. Samsung fabricates some, but they all rely on a company created by a Chinese man named Morris Chang. The world's most advanced chip fabrication is done by this company that Morris Chang created. The question we have now is, who in the world is Morris Chang?
Yeah, and what's nuts is most nerds don't know this. They don't know who Morris Chang is.
It's remarkable.
It's crazy. Like Gordon Moore, everyone's like, oh, yeah.
Of course.
But arguably Morris Chang has been more influential than Gordon Moore, at least on our current pipeline of chips.
He's done more to change the world. He's got to be.
Absolutely.
He's got to be in the list of the top 100 businessmen
for sure.
in the history of the world. Yeah. Hit the button. Let's talk about Morris Chang.
Morris Chang coming up next. Morris Chang, in many ways, created a world that allowed for the development of advanced chips that power our phones, watches, cars, and all the like of it, right?
He sure did.
He was born in China in 1931 he wanted to become a novelist or maybe a journalist.
To the chagrin of his parents.
Right. He moved to the U.S. in 1949 to attend some school I've never heard of. I think it's on the East Coast called Harvard.
Yeah.
And then later transferring to MIT.
All the way across town.
Where he earned his bachelor's and master's degrees in mechanical engineering.
Making his parents much happier.
I believe, yeah, I presume. By 1958, he was working for Texas Instruments, where he rose through the ranks quickly.
Where's that located?
That I think is in Texas.
Yeah.
TI ultimately provided him with the opportunity to earn his PhD from another small school I've never heard of called Stanford.
Right.
And I found this fascinating. His coworkers at TI would talk about the ferocity with which he would find inefficiencies in the manufacturing process. And he would push them out of the assembly lines as fast as he could.
How long was he at TI?
I think about 25 years, ultimately acting as the group's VP responsible for all of their worldwide semiconductor business.
Okay, so a guy from China, a Chinese man, lived in Texas.
Yep.
Really during the most beginning parts of the
semiconductor business,
semiconductor revolution.
Yep. This is pretty cool. So tying into what you said earlier, while he was working on a 4-transistor project at TI,
sure,
the manufacturing was all being done by IBM. And he recognized the opportunity to act as, we didn't call it this then, but as a chip foundry.
Yeah.
So the idea of separating the design of the chips from the very expensive process of fabrication.
Right.
And he'd take all the production risk, basically returning functional chips to a customer based on their designs.
Right.
And at the time, this was, of not just novel, it was just completely unheard of. The audaciousness of the idea was that there were no chip design firms that didn't also own fabrication facilities.
Well, they needed to, yeah.
Right? So in 1987...
This is a classic lesson in economics about specialization.
In 1987, he founded a company called TSMC, which was this is sort of like the beginning of the period where firms increasingly saw value in outsourcing their manufacturing capabilities to Asia.
Okay.
TSMC became one of the world's most profitable and sophisticated chip makers.
Still are to this day.
Yeah, absolutely to this day. Morris started with no customers. He eventually won some over. Not having to design his own chips allowed him to focus on streamlining and improving the production process. So this started this cycle of learning and improving, leading to a unparalleled expertise in the fabrication process.
Right.
So ultimately, by doing this, it allowed him to get better on the production side, the making side, faster than anybody else, because he get the benefit of making chips for different companies.
And better yields and all the rest of it, sure.
And then, in short order, companies had no alternatives to the TSMC. They were just too good, right? They got out in front of the race.
To this day, that's true.
Yeah, absolutely, to this day. And so it's worth noting that also while he was at TI, Morris pioneered the then controversial idea of pricing semiconductors, quote, ahead of the cost curve.
Yes.
So this is pretty cool. If you know anything about chips, this is sort of taken for granted, I think, over the past 20, 30 years, which meant sacrificing early profits or sort of the short-term gains to gain market share and achieve manufacturing yields that would result in greater profits over an extended timeline, right? Sort of the long term.
By the way, that's also rocketed us forward technologically.
Absolutely.
His willingness to do that.
Which tells me that apparently, and unlike me, Morris would pass the marshmallow test.
Deferred gratification?
Yep, totally.
Okay.
I would just be eating those marshmallows. So who is Morris Chang? He's arguably the most underrated business person in the past 100 years.
Yeah.
There are no modern iPhones or Macs without him.
Of course not.
Those A100 chips that we talked about earlier that make ChatGPT possible, they don't exist without Morris Chang. And every nerd should know about Morris Chang, right? But very few of us actually do.
Yeah.
So next we need to look at how...
He's retired now. But he's still
he's 91.
But he still goes in. He still goes into the office.
See how they're doing.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, exactly. Just kick him around a little bit.
Make sure the culture is still what it needs to be.
That's pretty impressive.
He's still hands on.
Yeah. Next, we need to look at how and why an American-educated Morris Chang moved 90+% of the world's advanced chip fabrication to a little tiny island in the Pacific Ocean called Taiwan.
Yeah. How did it go there?
All right. Well, we're going to find out.
Okay.
Hit the button.
When Nancy Pelosi visited Taiwan in 2022, one of the few people she met with was the Morris Chang in his 90s. But to understand why that meeting took place, you have to drop back a few decades in Taiwan's history. Taiwan has a complex history, by the way, of political control, marked by periods of colonization, revolution, and democratization. Taiwan was inhabited by various indigenous groups until the 17th century, when it was colonized by the Dutch. Insert your tulip and clog jokes
Tulips,
here.
clogs, that's what they brought.
The Dutch were eventually replaced by the Chinese Qing dynasty in 1683. Are you taking notes on all this?
Is there much remnants from the Dutch colonization in Taiwan still? I've been there once, but I don't remember.
I don't think so.
I don't think so either. Okay,
I have no idea.
Keep going.
Certainly not of the things you consider Dutch now. In 1895, Taiwan was ceded to Japan following China's defeat in the First Sino-Japanese War. The island was under Japanese rule until 1945.
Man, this thing has had more owners than a bet on Craigslist.
Exactly, but it's going to get important. After Japan's defeat in World War II, Taiwan became part of the Republic of China, which had been established in 1912 on the mainland, the Republic of China. Keep that in mind.
Yep.
The Republic of China government took control of Taiwan, but was unable to reunify the country, the mainland, after the Chinese Civil War. So the ROC, the Republic of China, retreated to Taiwan in 1949. And the People's Republic of China, the PRC we have now, was established on the mainland under communist rule. In the decades that followed, Taiwan underwent significant economic and political development, becoming one of the four Asian tigers and eventually transforming into a multi-party democracy. However, it remains politically separate from the People's Republic of China, which considers Taiwan to be a breakaway province and has not renounced the use of force to reunify the island with the mainland.
Yeah, pretty crazy they haven't renounced the use of force.
The international community is divided on the issue, with many countries recognizing the People's Republic of China as the legitimate government of China, but a smaller number recognizing the Republic of China and maintaining unofficial relations with Taiwan. It's super important that they maintain relations with Taiwan, as we will get to in a second.
Yep.
It became clear that little Taiwan needed to be able to defend itself against the behemoth Communist China. Communist China wanted it back.
Yep.
And the easiest way to do that was to make a really big, powerful friend.
Yep.
They needed to make themselves important to the Western world's supply chain. And brilliantly, they started by making sure that hundreds of Taiwanese engineers were doing PhDs in electrical engineering at Berkeley and Stanford from the 1950s.
I mean, it's sad they couldn't get into a school better than Berkeley.
In the early 1960s, Taiwan entered a period of rapid economic growth and industrialization called the Taiwan Miracle.
This is crazy to see how they've played this out over 60 years.
But brilliant that they went
Brilliantly,
after education so that
Yeah.
they would have a very smart pool of engineers on this little island that's
I
about
know.
the size of Maryland.
Yeah.
In 1987, they wrote a big check. When Morris Chang was shopping the world for a home for his chip foundry for hire, Taiwan put up half the money. And remember, starting up a chip foundry requires an enormous amount of money.
Yeah.
Thus was born the Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company, TSMC.
Yep.
Meanwhile, Taiwan has raised itself from a so-called flawed democracy to a full democracy. In fact, the 2020 Democracy Index, published by London-based Economist Intelligence Unit, raised Taiwan from the 31st place to the 11th, the highest in Asia.
So what's crazy about this is you got to believe in like 87, there weren't a lot of options to think you could go tackle the semiconductor market, right?
Right.
It was all in the U.S. You basically had...
It was in Texas and California.
Texas,
It wasn't even all over
California.
the U.S.
Yep, that's it.
Yeah.
Everything was there. But you got this guy who's been working at
Texas
at
for 25
TI
years
for
or more.
25
Sure.
years. And he's like, there's a better way, right? There's a better scalable way. And he saw that then going back.
He just
well
needed
before the
some
80s,
economic help.
He just needed some money, right?
And it turns out this little island needed some protection, some
Exactly.
security from its communist brethren who,
Yeah.
wanted to eat it.
Whoever controls Taiwan controls 90+% of all advanced chip making.
Right. And therefore controls the future of AI. Think next-gen smartphones, think next-gen smart bombs.
Think everything.
Think next-gen drones, think next-gen,
Wait, hold on. Are you going to buy a dishwasher that doesn't have AI in it
100%.
in 5 years?
Yes, of course.
Like it's going to be everything.
Should China decide to go to war with Taiwan, the West will very likely have no choice but to defend it.
Yep.
As Tufts professor Chris Miller, author of the excellent book Chip War, puts it, it certainly would be catastrophic to Apple or AMD if we were to lose access to Taiwan's semiconductor manufacturing company's facilities. But it's also dishwashers and microwaves and autos that would face tremendous disruptions. We would be back to a manufacturing crisis that would feel equivalent to a 1929 in terms of its shock. You wouldn't be able to buy a car for a year or two, and the same level of disruption for all sorts of manufactured goods. It's a huge problem. It's such a big problem that companies struggle to get their heads around how to insure against it because the costs of finding alternative solutions are tremendous. There is no alternative to TSMC in many cases. Obviously, the downside risk is substantial and arguably growing every day. By the way, TSMC makes 7 nanometer chips, which means those transistors are 7 nanometers, right? Very, very small. By comparison, the machinery Biden wants to restrict from going into China is anything that makes less than a 28 nanometer process. TSMC believes they'll be able to make a 2 nanometer chip by 2025.
That's bonkers.
Blows my mind.
A 2 nanometer chip. So there's a couple things about that. One, time to get a new unit.
Yeah.
Got to go down below nanometer.
For sure.
Not going to be talking about like 0.25 nanometers.
Right.
We should just do it in micro inches now.
You want to go back to inches?
I want to go back to, no, I really don't. I don't know how I ended up.
Freedom units.
I don't know how to be on the other side of the freedom units in this conversation.
So here we are. That's how a little island in the Pacific Ocean became the center of the universe and not just the chip-making universe. Or more clearly, because it's the center of the chip-making universe, it's the center of the real universe.
Of the real universe, yeah. As far as we know. You ever been?
No. You have?
Nice. A couple times. Not my favorite.
No?
I would like to give it a go again. I actually liked some of my visits to mainland better from like a culture perspective. I didn't spend enough time, I think, I was only in Taipei. It's cool. The people are great. I mean, the people are lovely.
Super dense island, population-wise.
Yeah, population-wise, for sure. Of course, when I was there, they had like a 6.8, too. I was in like the 18th floor of my hotel, and I'm like, well, this is fun.
Yeah.
I would like to give it another go and spend more time there. But this isn't the end of this story, right? Coming up, we're going to look at how a Dutch company became the linchpin of who controls AI's future.
Hit the button.
Hit the button. What is this ASML?
It's a Dutch company.
It's not HTML's lesser known brother?
No.
Oh. Well, this next segment's not going to be accurate then.
Okay.
No, as it turns out, it stands for Advanced Semiconductor Materials Lithography.
Lithography. More lithography. Thank goodness this episode has more lithography.
I know, listener, you thought, oh, they're done talking about lithography. I'm going to turn it off. Nope, here it comes again. So this ASML, this company is the largest company in the Netherlands, right?
How can that be?
It's bonkers to me. They're valued at $275 billion US.
Yes.
Right.
But have you ever heard of them?
No.
Right.
Not until this episode. And they employ over 36,000 people worldwide, right? They're sitting on like over 5,000 patents.
Right.
They are the sole supplier in the world, the sole supplier of extreme ultraviolet lithography machines, which are necessary to manufacture the most advanced chips in the world. No one else makes a machine like this. Right.
Remember, this is how we reduce the giant drawing on and get it
down to
fit
a chip
on the little chip.
Right. You want to make a 7 nanometer chip, you're talking to ASML, period, full stop. So nobody else makes a machine that's this advanced, right? The best part of all this research that I've done is ASML's company slogan, right? Because you would think it would be just something just boring as shit, right? You just think it would just be like, we make small chips. We do.
Of course.
We make tiny lights.
We do fun lithography.
Yay!
Sure.
No. Their company slogan is changing the world 1 nanometer at a time.
Oh my gosh.
You can't read that and not laugh, right?
That's brilliant.
Taking something as dry as lithography and they punched it up into changing the world 1 nanometer at a time. So this concept of lithography, the process of using light to create patterns on silicon wafers, as Jeff mentioned earlier, invented here in the U.S. In the late 50s.
In Texas and California.
California, where all the good things come from, and used from the earliest days of the first semiconductors. Right. So in the 80s and 90s, industry was trying to move to this EUV, extreme ultraviolet, right? Which is a more advanced type of lithography. And even though there are a bunch of U.S. firms and
explain why they wanted to use ultraviolet.
Smaller wavelength, right? So you want a
so
smaller
you can
wavelength,
get a more focused.
So you can get a small
burn.
Yep.
You're
you want the transistors to be smaller on the chips. You need smaller wavelength.
Okay.
Right. So that gets you into this extreme UV. So even though at the time there were a bunch of U.S. firms and the U.S. national labs that provided the funding and research for EUV, no U.S. firm could commercialize the equipment. ASML already had this sort of older generation equipment and had the capability to turn the science behind EUV lithography into mass manufacturable devices that they could sell.
It helps if you've been making the previous generation of equipment because now you're just doing an iteration. You're not starting from ground zero.
The gist of what they were doing was still sort of the same, right? They're putting light through a mask onto a silicon wafer.
Yeah. It's just a special kind of light so that you can have a very refined.
Yes. Yeah. So this is where it starts to get a little crazy.
Okay.
So this EUV light has a wavelength of 13.5 nanometers, right? And fortunately, creating light of this wavelength and all the necessary accoutrements to reflect it, it really can't be that hard, right? It's got to be super duper easy.
Right. I was thinking you just get a couple of Philips Hue bulbs.
Yeah, totally. You can change the color.
Sure.
Yeah, you just go to IKEA, pick up a couple mirrors,
Whatever you
it'll be
need.
fine. So this is the process. This is a non-embellished process of how they do this, how ASML does this, and it's absolutely bonkers.
Let me just mention real quickly.
Yes, please.
13.5 nanometers.
Super small.
Go up, just slightly smaller than that. You're in the X-ray spectrum.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you are. That's right. You are just below X-ray, right? That's how crazy this is. So here's the process that their machine, these machines that ASML sells, the only manufacturer in the world of them, this is the process for them to generate this EUV light. They take a ball of tin, about 30 millionths of a meter in diameter.
Yeah.
They get it moving at hundreds of miles per hour
Yep.
in a vacuum, so that they can then pulverize it with 2 shots from one of the most powerful lasers ever deployed in a commercial device.
Sounds easy.
Right? Yeah.
Sure.
Right? The tin then explodes into plasma, measuring hundreds of thousands of degrees Fahrenheit, several times hotter than the surface of the sun.
Wow.
Right? So this plasma then emits this extreme UV light at exactly the right wavelength, 13.5 nanometers.
Okay.
Which is then collected via a series of about a dozen mirrors. That's the good news.
Yeah.
The bad news is these mirrors need to be the flattest mirrors humans have ever produced.
Sure.
Right?
Ultra precise.
Right? Yeah, exactly. The mirrors reflect the light at just the right angle so that it hits the silicon wafer and carves the circuits on the chips that allow you to watch cat videos on your iPhone while you are supposed to be working.
Excellent.
My point here is it's a complicated machine. And just in case you weren't impressed by that, these machines cost about $150 million each.
It's amazing that it
US
costs
dollars.
more.
Yeah, right. There's no 2-day prime option for these. They require a couple jumbo jets to get delivered. As
I
in
think
more
they
than
actually.
one
I think they
747,
actually require 4 or 5
right, which
jumbo
is
jets.
bonkers.
That's how big this machine is.
These things are not small. And then once it's installed, it isn't like a Ron Popeil Showtime rotisserie where you can just set it and forget it.
Right.
It actually comes with staff that stays on site next to the machine for its entire lifespan.
Yeah.
Right. So that's how intricate and how closely coupled the production company is to ASML for making chips using this process.
If you want to waste an entire afternoon, go to YouTube and look at ASML's YouTube channel.
Oh, yeah? I haven't seen it.
Oh, my goodness.
Is it amazing?
It's so fun.
That's great. The process of developing this machine took 30 years, right?
Yeah.
And what's even crazier is there's only like a dozen at most customers of ASML worldwide.
Right.
Companies like TSMC or Samsung, Intel, that have the precision and capital to make use of these machines.
Right.
And
It's amazing TSMC can't make a machine like this, but
Right.
they can't. That's how specialized the individual parts of making chips has become.
You were at this place, yeah, where TSMC isn't just using ASML and nothing else, right? They've got a bunch of other vendors that do other interesting
Right.
things.
They have other specialties.
And they got to bring it all together. So if you can't mass manufacture these cutting edge chips, then you can't get the chips to build up the data center capacity that you would need to train these AI systems.
Right.
And that sort of brings us to where we are today. The U.S. ultimately wants to stop China from developing advanced chips, to stop them from creating advanced data centers, to stop them from developing advanced AIs, right? And we're using ASML's tooling as a choke point by restricting U.S., Japanese, and Dutch firms from transferring equipment and knowledge into China.
Right. But that won't stop them for forever.
No, slow them down.
Right.
But I think what likely could be the outcome there is you keep them behind. So like they're going to get 7 nanometer technology. It just might be when we're on 2 or 1 or whatever is next, right? So but
the single most important thing you need to know when you are going to imitate someone's existing technology, can you guess what it is? Very simply, the most important thing you need to know is that it can be done.
Oh yeah, sure.
Because then you don't give up.
Yeah, exactly.
Then you just keep working at it until you figure it out.
I just told them how to do it. It's just a ball of tin and some lasers.
I'm sure they'll reference the podcast.
But no, really, make no mistake. A war or a blockade between China and Taiwan would be catastrophic, right? Not just on the tech sector, but on all of manufacturing.
It brings American business to a stop.
It does. The TSMC produces 90% of the world's most advanced processors, which is amazing.
Yeah.
But then if you think about it from a Moore's law sort of state, it produces over 1/3 of the new computing power the world adds each year.
Yeah.
That is mind-boggling, right? And this wouldn't only affect Apple and AMD, but as you mentioned earlier, it'd be cars and dishwashers and washing machines. Everything would face significant disruption.
It's remarkable that the microchip business is this fragile.
Yeah.
I mean, it all flows through. There's no redundancy to this.
So Chris Miller talks about this because while you look at it as sort of a business-minded person and go, well, why not just compete, right? Why don't Jeff and I just start a fabrication?
Because it's impossible.
Because it's basically impossible, right?
Yeah.
Like you would need not infinite time, but you would need like 15 or 20 years to get to today, where they're at. You would need tens, if not hundreds of billions of dollars.
And by then you'd be 15 or
20 years
behind.
So it's like you just can't really catch up. And it seems unlikely. I mean, at some point we'll probably go away from lithography. Probably not in our lifetimes.
Although if you throw
a long ways away.
If you throw $280 billion at it, you might make some advances.
It was amazing to me that this even exists, that there's a one company choke point in this process.
Well, there are other tools, tooling parts of the chip making process.
This isn't the only choke point, for sure.
You just need one. You basically just need one to slow China down. So back to the story that all of this started with. China's access to semiconductors could take yet another hit soon.
Yep.
The Japanese and Netherlands will soon join the U.S. in restricting exports of the semiconductor manufacturing equipment to China. That's in response to President Joe Biden visiting the Netherlands and, as you like to say, walking among the tulips, where he asked the Dutch government to restrict export from a company called ASML, the largest company in the Netherlands. ASML's machines could literally decide who controls the future of AI.
It's not just this super, bleeding edge tech, as you mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
They're really going back to, I think you said a 28 nanometer process.
Right.
So,
which is a generation earlier.
Yeah, a couple generations earlier, right? Yeah. So it's a pretty big swath of stuff that we're saying.
It does make Taiwan much more desirable for China to conquer.
But there's more to that story too, right? I mean, TSMC is building a giant production facility in Phoenix.
Yes.
That is not small.
That's why we're spending $280 billion on the... what did you call it? The Chips and Guac Act?
Yeah. And you've got Intel building that plant in Ohio, a foundry in Ohio. You've got TSMC's in Phoenix. And these are massive facilities. I mean, if you live in Phoenix and you drive up north by where the 303 hits the 17, you will see an amazing amount of concrete being poured.
Right.
That's TSMC's.
It's not because we just want to be part of this delicious chip business. We want to get ourselves our hands on some of that chip making money. Yeah. Because you can't have Taiwan fall to China and have no alternative.
Yeah.
It's because your smart bombs and your fighter jets and things that rely on those, and drones and things that rely on those chips, and your more mundane things, you have to have a supply of those chips that you can't lose control of.
I'm not saying this is how this will go down, but you could make the argument that, like, once you get TSMC up and running in Phoenix, you want to airlift everything out of Taiwan.
Everyone you can talk to come out. Yeah.
And scuttle the ship there.
I want an awful lot of nice relocation packages put together.
Hopefully this all makes a little more sense now.
Quickly, before we go, have you seen or read anything good this last week?
Yes. The best thing I read was the research for this episode, which is the episode of Decoder with Neela Patel interviewing Chris Miller. It was great. It's where I learned just about everything about ASML and Morris Chang. It's super interesting.
Fantastic. I'm going to recommend a Netflix movie called You People. Jonah Hill, Julia Louis-Dreyfus, Eddie Murphy. It is 3/4 of a really good movie. The end kind of derails.
That's the last quarter?
For me.
So just turn it off?
The final act. Well, you can watch it. It's the first 3/4 are so promising. It's such a strong movie.
Falls flat.
It doesn't fall flat. It goes from an A movie to like a kind of a Hollywood kind of ending.
So it goes from like a Ghostbusters to like a Ghostbusters 2.
Yes,
I'm trying to put this into terms I understand.
That is the perfect way to describe it.
I bring everything back to a Harold Ramis.
All right, that's the episode.
Thank you for joining us for all this nonsense. Truly terrible podcast from the Awful Company. I'm CJ Little.
I'm Jeff Parker.
If you like this program, please follow, download, subscribe. If you really like us, give us a couple stars, maybe, 4 or 5. You can find us on Apple and Google Podcasts, Amazon Music, iHeartRadio, wherever you get your podcast from.
Podcastindex.org. Special thanks to our floor director, Phil Lawler.
Thanks, Phil. We'll be here every Wednesday morning for more nonsense. Join us.